Okay, let's unpack this. Have you ever truly considered, what it takes to run a criminal enterprise in our hyper-connected digital age? It's so far removed from that old stereotype, the lone hacker in a dark room. What we're actually seeing is, well, a whole sophisticated industry. It operates with disturbing efficiency. We're talking about something profoundly organized, almost like a legitimate business, but, dedicated entirely to malice.
What's truly fascinating here is precisely how organized and business-like cybercrime has become. It really is. It's this vast ecosystem now with specialized roles, intricate supply chains, even underground marketplaces.
Yeah.
It's complex. Today, we're pulling back the curtain on this intricate world. We're going to explore the different players, their chilling tactics, and the surprising ways they exploit everyday software. It's just such a dynamic and incredibly complex landscape. It completely challenges our sort of traditional notions of cyber threats.
Right. So our mission today is really to give you a shortcut to being well-informed about this whole evolving landscape. We'll cover everything from, state-sponsored espionage infiltrating the most secure systems to these cunning ransomware gangs holding entire companies hostage, and even how open source software, stuff you might use every single day, can be turned against you. Hopefully, you'll gain a new perspective on just how sophisticated these operations are, why understanding them is absolutely critical in today's world, and maybe get some powerful aha moments about the sheer ingenuity these adversaries employ. But before we dive into the depths of this cyber underworld, we want to take a moment to thank our sponsor, Stonefly. They are a leader in enterprise storage, backup, and disaster recovery, AI storage, and cloud solutions. So if you're looking for secure, truly ransomware-proof storage, Stonefly sells air-gapped and immutable storage, which is exactly the kind of thing you need these days. You can contact sales at stonefly.com to schedule a demo, and as you'll soon hear, security at that foundational level. It's more critical than ever, especially when these criminals are actively targeting your backups, looking for every single weakness. So when we think about who's actually behind these cyber attacks, it's so easy to picture that single person in a hoodie, right, hunched over a keyboard. But the reality is just way more complex. We've got distinct groups operating with vastly different goals, different resources, and often just shocking levels of sophistication. It's not just a person, it's an entire organizational structure, really,
Yeah.
each with its own unique threat profile.
Indeed. And the first major category of threat actors we really need to talk about are state-sponsored actors. These are individuals, or often groups, directly funded, directed, or at least supported by national governments. Their primary goals are typically not financial gain, well, not directly anyway. Instead, they're focused on high-stakes stuff.
Yeah.
Espionage, critical infrastructure sabotage, maybe influence operations against other nations, organizations, or even specific individuals. And the implications of this are huge. Because they have state backing, the chances of their prosecution are minimal, practically zero in many cases, which grants them this significant level of impunity, right? It lets them play a very, very long game.
So they're playing on a global chessboard, essentially, not just trying to make a quick buck, and with the backing of an entire state.
Wow, I imagine their capabilities are almost limitless then. Exactly. Their advanced capabilities, their vast infrastructure, it allows them to achieve objectives that, common cybercriminals can only dream of. They can, quite literally, bring an organization to its knees through strategic sabotage. Or they can maintain an incredibly low profile while infiltrating networks for just prolonged periods of espionage, years sometimes. And while direct financial gain isn't the main driver, it's worth noting, even espionage can have monetization links down the line, like maybe selling stolen state secrets or proprietary industrial information, or even using stolen data to help facilitate a ransomware attack against a rival nation's industry. It gets messy.
That's a chilling thought, especially the espionage part, trying to pull information out of systems that are supposed to be completely isolated. I've heard the term air-gapped systems, right? Supposedly impenetrable, designed to have no network connection whatsoever. How do they even manage to exfiltrate data from something that is, by definition, offline?
Right. And this is where their ingenuity truly shines. It forces us to kind of redefine what impenetrable even means. Imagine that secure vault, right? It should be physically disconnected, immune to digital compromise. But state-sponsored actors are finding these incredibly covert, really unexpected ways to pull data out of it. There's been extensive research into specialized malware and techniques just for data exfiltration from these air-gapped systems. They exploit subtle hardware features, basically turning seemingly innocuous components into covert communication channels.
Wait, what kind of unexpected ways are we talking about here? This sounds like something out of a spy movie, seriously.
It absolutely does. We're talking about methods you just wouldn't normally associate with data transmission at all. For
Yeah.
instance, they've been known to exploit power lines, literally using the electrical wiring within a building as a transmission medium for data.
No way. Through the power cables.
Yeah. Or security cameras, turning the camera's feed or even its internal components into a data exfiltration channel. Even the cooling fans inside a computer can be manipulated. They can generate acoustic signals that carry data, which can then be picked up by nearby microphones.
A computer fan whispering secrets. That's truly mind-boggling. It just underscores how far these threat actors will go, exploiting even the most benign components.
It's a level of stealth,
Wow.
and the patience involved that makes these methods so dangerous. One particularly fascinating technique involves abusing DDR SD-RAM buses, the memory buses. Basically, they make them generate electromagnetic emissions in the 2.4 gigahertz Wi-Fi bands.
So the computer's memory is literally emitting radio signals to leak data.
That's what we've seen, yeah. Essentially turning the computer's memory into a tiny, very low-power radio transmitter. Now, these methods often lead to incredibly slow transmission rates. You're not exfiltrating gigabytes in seconds, nothing like that. But they are exceptionally difficult to discover. The goal isn't speed, right? It's undetectability over a long period. It really highlights the long game strategy and the vast resources these state-backed groups can bring to bear. The core insight here is that security isn't just about what's connected, but how deeply adversaries can exploit fundamental hardware.
Okay, so state-sponsored actors are playing this long game, often for political or strategic ends, with resources that make them incredibly hard to counter. But there's another group, right? Driven more by ideology, not money, but they can still cause significant disruption, often with very visible public impacts.
Indeed. These are the hacktivists. Hacktivism is essentially a form of civil disobedience, but instead of physical protests, it leverages cyber tools. They use them to protest or take direct action against political decisions, organizations, sometimes entire nations. It's cybercrime, basically carried out by individuals or civil groups, but driven by a social or political cause.
And crucially, they are not state-sponsored. That's a key distinction, right? They operate independently.
Exactly. Unlike state-sponsored groups, hacktivists operate independently. They might even target the very state they come from if they disagree with its policies. Their aim is to promote their agendas or protest by disrupting services. Think denial of service attacks, right?
Yeah.
Knocking websites offline, or defacing websites with their messages, or leaking confidential information that they believe serves their cause. Understanding this motivation helps contextualize certain types of high-profile attacks we often see in the news, where the objective is clearly more about public messaging and disruption than, say, financial gain. They want to make a statement, and they use cyber means to do it loudly.
Okay, and then there are the groups whose primary driver is just cold, hard cash. And they've taken a particular type of cybercrime and really turned it into a full-blown industry. This is where the landscape gets even more complicated, I think, and directly impactful for businesses and individuals alike.
This brings us squarely to ransomware groups. These are cybercriminal organizations focused completely on deploying ransomware to extort money from their victims. Their modus operandi is pretty straightforward. They encrypt a victim's data, rendering it totally unusable, and then they demand a ransom, usually in cryptocurrency, for the decryption key. And this form of crime has just absolutely exploded in the last decade. It's become a multi-billion-dollar industry, easily.
And why is that? What were the critical factors that fueled this explosion? Why ransomware? Why now?
Well, the primary reason really was the advent and widespread adoption of cryptocurrencies, especially Bitcoin initially. Before crypto, getting a ransom paid globally, securely, and crucially, anonymously was incredibly difficult. Traditional financial institutions could track transactions, right? That made it super risky for criminals. But with Bitcoin, and especially now with privacy-preserving protocols like Monero or the use of crypto mixers or tumblers, cybercriminals can perform pretty much arbitrary financial transactions globally with a high degree of privacy. They completely circumvent traditional financial controls. This just dramatically lowered the risk for the criminals and facilitated the growth of this entire illicit economy. The anonymity in payment was a true game changer.
Right, that anonymity in payment was the key enabler. Makes sense. And are all ransomware attacks the same, or are there like different flavors that targets might experience?
No, they're definitely not all the same. There are two main forms, distinguished really by their modus operandi. First, you have automated ransomware. This is what most people might picture initially. It spreads kind of like a virus or a worm, opportunistically infecting any device it can reach. Click a bad link, open a bad attachment. It quickly encrypts whatever it finds, following a pre-scripted scenario. Think of it as a broad nets-out approach. casting a wide net to catch as many victims as possible without much human intervention after the initial deployment. It's random, but still devastating if it hits you.
So automated ransomware is like the digital equivalent of, I don't know, a drive-by shooting opportunistic, maybe less targeted, but still incredibly destructive. What about the other type? That's where I hear the term human-operated come into play, which implies a much more active and targeted approach, right?
The other, and frankly far more insidious type, is human-operated ransomware, or HUMOP sometimes. This is a much more advanced, targeted approach that truly highlights the industry aspect of modern cybercrime. Here, cybercriminals don't just, spray and pray, hope for an infection. They actively compromise an organization's systems. Could be physical servers, could be cloud environments. Once they're in, they meticulously work to elevate their privileges. They might use various exploits, brute force credentials, maybe use phishing to get higher access. They essentially become this unseen presence inside the network.
So they're not just hitting one machine and encrypting it, they're gaining deeper access, becoming an unseen presence, patiently setting the stage for maximum impact. That's way scarier.
Precisely. After gaining that initial foothold, they establish persistence.
Yeah.
They make sure they can maintain access, even if the victim tries to lock them out or reboot systems. They install backdoors. Then comes the lateral movement. They methodically penetrate all reachable hosts within the network, prioritizing the critical assets, servers, databases, core infrastructure. Domain controllers are a huge target. Their goal is to maximize the potential impact across the entire organization and make sure they compromise as much as possible before they actually pull the trigger on the encryption.
And I've heard about them specifically targeting backups, too. Is that standard practice now, or is it just a particularly cruel twist they add?
Oh, it's an absolutely crucial tactic now, pretty much standard for human-operated groups. It's designed to guarantee payment. Human-operated ransomware groups will actively seek out and destroy all backup mechanisms they find within the victim's network. This could be local backups, network-attached storage, even cloud snapshots if they can gain the necessary administrative access. By destroying the backups, they eliminate the victim's ability to restore their data without paying the ransom. It ruthlessly forces their hand. They leave victims with this chilling ultimatum: pay us or lose everything, forever.
That's incredibly ruthless. Just wow. But I also keep hearing about double extortion. What exactly is that? It sounds like an extra layer of pain for victims.
It is. Double extortion is a very common and highly effective tactic now. It significantly increases the pressure on victims. So, before encrypting the data and demanding a ransom for the decryption key, these groups first exfiltrate, meaning they steal, a copy of the victim's confidential data. They pull it out to their own remote storage. Then, they demand a second ransom, not only for the decryption key, but also a separate payment not to publish the stolen confidential data on public leak sites or sell it to competitors.
Okay, so even if an organization has robust, maybe offline or air-gapped backups like the ones Stonefly provides, and they can technically restore their systems without paying the encryption ransom, they might still pay just to prevent their sensitive data from being leaked online. That's a huge pressure point, especially for businesses dealing with proprietary info, client data, regulatory compliance stuff.
Precisely. It maximizes the chances of getting paid, even from well-prepared victims. This adaptability is what makes human-operated ransomware so uniquely dangerous. Unlike the automated variants, the human operators can trace valuable assets, they can adapt their approach on the fly, they can even identify and counter defensive measures as the defender tries to apply them in real time. This sophisticated, agile approach causes immense business disruption and really demands robust, well-tested recovery plans and truly secure, immutable backups. Air-gapped storage becomes critical here. It just highlights that trust in your systems alone isn't enough. You need a proactive, adaptive defense, assuming they will get in eventually.
It's just so clear these aren't just one-off attacks or, the work of individual actors anymore. What we're witnessing is an entire economy, right? A dark industry with its own structure, specialized roles, even supply chains. It's truly malware as a service, or MaaS. It really does sound like a shadow business mirroring legitimate enterprises.
That's an excellent way to put it. This isn't just random hacking. It's organized crime that has absolutely adopted modern business principles. Within these threat actor groups, you'll find a highly structured workforce with distinct responsibilities. For instance, they employ dedicated developers. And these aren't just coders writing malware payloads. They build the sophisticated platforms the groups use for internal communication. They create the payment tools for ransom collection, develop monitoring systems to track their campaigns, manage their illicit payments.
Wow. So they're building internal tools, like a tech startup, but for crime. That's an unsettling thought.
Exactly. And they're also responsible for creating and continually updating their public-facing web pages, like the victim announcement pages, the leak sites that ransomware groups use to shame their targets into paying, or the negotiation portals where victims communicate with the criminals to arrange ransom payments. This continuous operation and engagement just demonstrates their professionalism and commitment to their business.
Okay. And to run an operation of this scale, they must need a serious backend, right? Robust infrastructure. Who handles that critical support role?
That falls to the system administrators. These individuals manage the vast infrastructure used by these threat actors. We're talking potentially hundreds of multi-tiered servers. Their role is absolutely critical for maintaining robustness against takedowns by law enforcement or security researchers. They make sure there's sufficient bandwidth to launch attacks, manage armies of bots, securely store gigabytes or terabytes of exfiltrated information, and most importantly, they have to prevent authorities from identifying the group, maintain operational security, anonymity. These aren't entry-level IT roles,
Huh.
They need to be highly skilled, security-savvy engineers who can quickly adapt, move infrastructure around, and are basically on-call 24/7 for immediate actions if something goes wrong.
So developers for the software, system admins for the infrastructure, what about the face of the operation? Do they actually have like a PR team to manage their image and relationships? It sounds crazy, but...
Believe it or not, yes.
Yeah.
In a way. Members of the group are often specifically in charge of public relations or earlier communications. Their goal is to be the voice of the group, develop its brand name, often through notoriety and successful attacks, and manage relationships with other criminal groups in the ecosystem. Partnerships are common. But it goes beyond just managing their image within the cyber underworld. These PR-type individuals might also be assigned to make crucial connections, maybe purchasing infrastructure from unwitting or sometimes complicit providers, finding individuals to serve as insiders within target organizations, or, in the case of state-sponsored groups, maybe even discreetly interacting with authorities to gather intel or negotiate under certain circumstances.
This structure, it just makes them incredibly resilient, professional, capable of large-scale operations, almost like a legitimate, if illicit, business. It's truly unsettling how sophisticated this has become. And like any good business, they also outsource, right? They acquire services. This is where the underground marketplaces come in, becoming hubs for buying and selling capabilities.
Indeed. These capabilities are readily available through what we call illicit marketplaces, forums, channels, and servers. And while many of these are hosted on the dark web, you'd be surprised how many underground markets and forums exist on the surface web too, operating semi-openly sometimes. They are central hubs for the entire MaaS ecosystem. They're used for recruiting new members, advertising new malware strains, seeking new capabilities, essentially acting as job boards and service catalogs for cybercriminals.
Wow, it sounds like it's never been easier for someone to get into cybercrime then, if they know where to look. Are there specific platforms where these services are most commonly advertised these days?
Absolutely. Beyond dedicated forums, which definitely still exist, platforms like Telegram channels and Discord servers have become incredibly common places. You see various illicit capabilities openly advertised and sold there. Everything from exploit kits, phishing kits, stolen credentials, to access to compromised networks. This open advertising of services truly underscores the commoditization of cyber tools and services. It's like a criminal version of a software as a service provider, complete with sometimes customer support and product listings.
And who are the key players in actually getting that initial access, the foot in the door to networks that others can then exploit? It sounds like there's a specialized role just for that.
That brings us to initial access brokers, or IABs. These have become really significant players. They are basically middlemen who specialize in obtaining unauthorized access to compromised systems, networks, or data, and then selling that access to other criminals. They are essentially the frontline penetrators of the MaaS supply chain. They do the initial break-in. They achieve this access through various methods, deploying malware, running sophisticated phishing campaigns, exploiting unpatched vulnerabilities, whatever works.
So they do the hard work of breaking in and then they just sell the keys to the castle. How do they price this kind of access? Does a big company command a bigger price?
Precisely. Once access is obtained, IABs advertise and sell this access. The price varies significantly based on a few factors. The perceived value of the target, obviously a large corporation with valuable data versus a small business. The level of access obtained is key administrator privileges are worth way more than just a standard user count, and the potential for financial gain or espionage that can be derived from that access. IABs significantly reduce the time needed for a full-blown attack because they've already found and penetrated the targets. They then delegate control to their clients via things like RDP, VPNs, or web shells, enabling large-scale malware deployment much faster.
Gotcha. And it sounds like phishers play a foundational role in this chain, too. Their work is often the first domino to fall, getting those initial credentials or malware infections.
Yes, phishers are absolutely critical and can wear multiple hats in the MaaS ecosystem. They can certainly act as IABs themselves, right, by compromising victims and then passing control of those systems to another threat actor. Or they can act as affiliates, just distributing malware through their extensive phishing campaigns for a cut of the profits. Furthermore, they can also provide phishing kits. These are pre-made tools that allow other, maybe less skilled threat actors to easily masquerade as legitimate organizations, creating convincing fake login pages, crafting deceptive emails. This also extends to malvertising, using malicious ads to lure victims. It really illustrates how even those seemingly simple phishing emails are often part of a much larger, highly organized supply chain.
It's not just the people and the illicit markets that are professionalized, though. It's also the underlying infrastructure that makes these operations possible, sometimes with unwitting help from legitimate businesses. It's really amazing how they leverage legitimate services for illegitimate ends, basically turning them into part of their criminal supply chain without them maybe even knowing.
That's a critical point. The MaaS ecosystem absolutely benefits from a plethora of infrastructure providers. And here's where it gets particularly nuanced. Businesses, often without their knowledge or consent, can be used as service and infrastructure providers for malware distribution, management, command and control, data exfiltration. Well, it's usually unwitting abuse of their services. There are also, frankly, occasions where companies might just turn a blind eye to cybercriminals using their platforms, maybe because it's profitable or hard to police.
So, legitimate companies can be unknowingly complicit or maybe just not caring enough to stop it. What kind of services are they abusing most often?
A prime example is VPN services, virtual private networks. VPNs are designed to enhance privacy and security online, right? Encrypting internet traffic, masking IP addresses. Well, this very design makes them an ideal veil for the MaaS ecosystem. They provide a crucial layer of anonymity for threat actors, obscuring their real IP addresses, making it incredibly difficult for law enforcement and researchers to trace malicious activities back to their sources. Plus, VPNs allow them to circumvent geo-restrictions and censorship. This enables access to blocked resources or markets they need for spreading malware, operating command and kernel C2 servers, launching phishing, or distributing illegal content. It's like using a privacy tool to facilitate global crime right under our noses.
Yeah, wow. And I've heard about residential IP proxies being abused too. That sounds like it would make tracing even harder.
Correct. In recent years, there's been a significant rise in the exploitation of residential IP addresses as proxies. These are often obtained through backdoor devices, meaning people's home computers, maybe their router or smart devices, are silently recruited into a botnet without their knowledge. They become unwilling mules for malicious traffic. This practice of mixing cross-border traffic with these residential proxies severely complicates jurisdictional and legal challenges for takedown and tracking efforts. It's incredibly difficult for authorities to pinpoint the origin of an attack when it's bouncing through dozens or hundreds of legitimate-looking home IPs across various countries. It's basically hiding in plain sight within normal internet traffic.
Okay, so it's not just the live operations. They also have sophisticated testing environments, right? Like a QA department for malware, making sure their stuff works before they deploy it.
Yes, that's another critical piece of the puzzle. Finally, you have these private testing infrastructures built specifically for malware authors to test their samples. Now, unlike public services like VirusTotal, which share detection results with anti-malware companies helping the good guys, these private platforms do not disclose their findings. This allows malware authors to test and tweak their executables, their payloads, for maximum stealth and evasion before deploying them in the wild. They can essentially ensure their binaries will remain undetected by many common anti-malware products, giving them a significant advantage right out of the gate. The availability of all these services, the VPNs, the proxies, the private testing, whether the providers are complicit or unwitting, greatly lowers the barrier to entry for cybercriminals. It provides them with ready-made tools and infrastructure with a high probability of success.
Okay, now, let's talk about how these sophisticated actors are actually getting their malicious code into our systems. Because the trend isn't just about traditional, easily identifiable malware packages anymore, is it? It's about weaponizing platforms many of us rely on every single day, like GitHub, and exploiting our inherent trust in them. This feels like where the game changes fundamentally.
That's a crucial shift we're seeing in the landscape of open-source software supply chain attacks. It really is.
Yeah.
While we've actually seen, maybe surprisingly, A decrease in the raw number of malicious packages being uploaded to traditional open source repositories like NPM for JavaScript or PyPI for Python. The stealth and sophistication of attacks targeting platforms like GitHub are rapidly increasing. And this is a huge concern because developers everywhere rely heavily on platforms like GitHub. It makes them incredibly high-value targets for adversaries. If they can inject malicious code into the software supply chain via GitHub, they can potentially reach a huge number of victims downstream who trust and use that code.
Right. And here's where it gets really interesting. There's a group called Banana Squad, which, okay, is a perfect illustration of this new, highly deceptive approach. It sounds kind of harmless, Banana Squad, but clearly they're not.
It truly is a deceptive name.
Yeah.
The Banana Squad campaign was first identified by Checkmarx back in October 2023. They named it after one of the early malicious domains the group used, bananasquad.ru. Their original campaign, starting around April 2023, was relentless. They deployed hundreds of malicious packages using all sorts of different usernames. These were Windows-based payloads designed to steal just an extensive amount of sensitive data. System info, application data, browser credentials, cookies, cryptocurrency wallet details, the works. This initial campaign amassed nearly 75,000 downloads before it was finally identified and the packages were removed.
75,000 downloads before removal. That's a massive reach, huge potential impact. And they've evolved since then, right? Becoming even more subtle in their tactics.
Yes, exactly. Their newer campaigns demonstrate even greater sophistication, really focusing on stealth. In November 2024, researchers at SANS's Internet Storm Center analyzed some Trojanized Python files linked to Banana Squad. And they discovered this really clever trick exploiting a UI feature on GitHub itself. The attackers used incredibly long sets of spaces, just space characters, to push the actual malicious backdoor code content completely off the visible screen to the right. So if you were just casually viewing the code directly on GitHub's website, or even in many standard code editors, it'll look perfectly fine. You wouldn't see the bad stuff. The dzerbeni.ru repository was linked to this particular campaign.
Hold on. So you'd look at the code file and it would appear perfectly normal, but there's this hidden malicious part you couldn't even see unless you manually scrolled way, way over to the right. That's incredibly devious. It's truly a hidden layer of attack.
Precisely. Pure visual deception. And then, Reversing Labs made an even more extensive discovery more recently in June 2025. They found over 60 GitHub repositories containing hundreds of these Trojanized files, all cleverly disguised as legitimate hacking tools or utility scripts, things people might search for. The deception tactics were subtle but effective. For example, most of these malicious repositories had only one repository per GitHub account, a strong indicator of fake accounts created solely for hosting this malicious content. The about text and the readme MD files within these repositories often contained emojis and dynamically generated strings, a subtle but consistent signature that helped link them together. And yes, they continued to use that many spaces trick in the Trojanized Python files to hide the malicious code. You really needed specialized tools like Spectre Analyze's preview function or Xviewer to actually reveal this hidden off-screen code. They masqueraded as a wide range of fake tools, appealing to various user interests, things like Discord Nitro Generator, Ransomware Builder, even Bitcoin Wallet Finder or popular game cheats, stuff people would actively look for and download.
Okay, that's clever targeting. But how were researchers able to definitively say, yes, this is Banana Squad, and not just some other group using similar tricks? What were the definitive fingerprints that linked these newer campaigns so strongly?
Yeah, the attribution was indeed quite strong, based on several factors. The unique payload URL structure used in the dzerbeni.ui campaign, specifically with that repo query string, was a key indicator. Combine that with the very distinctive many spaces tactic for code obfuscation. And finally, the specific sequence and type of encoding and encryption used in the Trojanized Python files. All of these definitively link these newer campaigns back to Banana Squad, matching the earlier documented activities reported by Checkmarx. This consistent fingerprinting is absolutely crucial for threat intelligence, right? It allows us to track these evolving groups even as they change infrastructure. A new related campaign was also detected just recently on June 6, 2025, using the domain 1312services.ru, which is very similar in structure to an earlier domain they used, 1312stealer.ou. Thankfully, all 67 of those recently discovered Trojanized repositories were reported and removed by GitHub. But the number of times they were cloned or downloaded before removal is unknown, so there could be potentially many victims out there.
The Banana Squad case just makes it crystal clear how these adversaries weaponize our trust in platforms like GitHub using really clever tricks. Now, let's explore an even more, maybe insidious trend. how these groups leverage widely used, legitimate open source tools, turning something as benign and familiar as Notepad into a covert weapon. This truly highlights that even familiar applications aren't inherently safe if you get them from untrusted places.
This is a significant challenge because Trojanized open source software is extremely difficult to spot. It really is. It takes on the facade, the appearance of legitimate non-malicious software. That makes it incredibly stealthy, especially for targeted attacks where an adversary wants to remain undetected for as long as possible. That uncanny resemblance to a legitimate file can easily fool users, right? Especially maybe employees with limited technical know-how. They see an icon they recognize, they run it.
And you investigated a specific case involving notepad.exe, which is, a super common, legitimate Windows application name. How did that investigation begin, and what did you find about this seemingly innocent file?
Right. So our investigation started with the detection of a suspicious file named notepad.exe. Now, as most people know, Notepad is a legitimate text editor built into Windows. However, malware authors frequently camouflage their malicious files by using the names of legitimate, common software like notepad.exe just to try and evade detection or suspicion. This particular file was initially identified as being dropped onto a system via entos krnl.exe, which is the Windows operating system kernel executable. Now, that could indicate a sophisticated exploit targeting the kernel. But further telemetry data strongly suggested it was more likely dropped via network shares, probably administrative shares. This points towards a pre-existing foothold or lateral movement within a network they were already inside.
Okay, so it was already on the system, cleverly disguised. What did its root cause analysis reveal about its actual behavior? I assume it wasn't just opening a blank text document.
Absolutely not. Performing a root cause analysis showed that this malicious notepad.exe performed a whole series of highly suspicious actions completely unrelated to text editing. Instead of just launching the editor, it systematically called several standard Windows system tools in the background, things like ipconfig to get network settings, net.exe to enumerate user groups and network shares, reg.exe to dump registry keys, systeminfo to gather OS details, and tasklist.exe to see running processes. Its true purpose was clearly to covertly gather extensive reconnaissance on the compromised system, everything from network configurations to running processes, user accounts, detailed OS info, the works. This is absolutely typical behavior for a backdoor, designed to map out the system and network, facilitate further compromise, or allow remote control later on.
Wow. So a full-blown reconnaissance mission, basically, gathering all the intel about the compromised system and network before maybe delivering its true payload. And what about its appearance? You said it was named notepad.exe. Was it easy to tell it wasn't the real Notepad or maybe Notepad++ code?
Well, this is where the deception got really clever. Its superficial appearance was quite convincing. If you looked at the file properties in Windows Explorer, it actually listed Notepad++ out as the product name and file description, making it seem like the popular open-source text editor. However, there were subtle inconsistencies if you looked closely. Legitimate Notepad++ files are usually named notepad++.exe with two pluses, not notepad.exe. That was one clue. Also, the version number listed in the properties was quite old, suggesting it wasn't an official up-to-date binary from the Notepad++ project. But here's the kicker. Incredibly, when you actually executed the file, its user interface looked and functioned convincingly like a typical legitimate Notepad++ out, so an initial visual inspection by a regular user. They would likely reveal nothing suspicious at all. It looked and felt like the real deal.
Okay, so it looked like Notepad++ out, had properties saying Notepad++ out, but had that slightly off name and an old version number. And even when someone ran it, it looked like the real thing. Where was the hidden malicious behavior actually happening then?
The key behavioral anomaly, the thing that really gave it away during analysis, was its hidden action. It actively searched for a specific file named config.dat, located in the C Windows debug folder. Now, config.dat is not a standard file used by Notepad++A, so its presence, or the attempt to find it, was a major red flag. It pointed directly to its true hidden purpose. This config.dat file was essentially an encrypted blob file, basically a compact, self-contained package of malicious code. When we decompiled the code of this malicious notepad.exe, we found exactly what we expected. It had additional code segments compared to a typical non-malicious Notepad++ file. This added code was specifically responsible for finding, loading, and decrypting that config.dat file. Once decrypted, it would execute the malicious code from the blob file directly in memory, allowing it to perform its backdoor routines without writing more obvious malicious files to disk. This technique, using a legitimate-looking loader to execute an encrypted payload from a separate file, is actually reminiscent of older, quite sophisticated malware families like PLUGX. It shows a certain level of maturity in the adversary's toolkit.
Right. Executing in memory makes it stealthier too. And were they always delivering the same payload with this method, the same backdoor? Or did they mix it up depending on their target or objective?
They absolutely mixed it up. We observed instances using the exact same loader, the Trojanized notepad.exe,
Yeah.
but delivering diverse payloads via different config.dat files.
Right.
In one case, the payload decrypted from config.dat was detected as Trojan spy win32.elizagaby ADB, which is known for stealing credentials. In another instance on a different machine, it delivered ransom.win32.exx.yaak-b, which is a variant of the Defray ransomware. Further investigation revealed other blob files used with the same loader that led to entirely different malicious payloads as well. This flexibility is key for them. It allows the attackers to deploy whatever malware is most suitable for their current objective. Maybe initial recon, maybe credential theft, maybe full ransomware deployment, all using the same initial stealthy entry vector. It makes it harder to predict and defend against.
Okay, so they could swap out the config.dat file to change the attack completely. So how did this initial malicious file, the fake notepad, likely get onto the system in the first place?
Based on the overall context of the incident, the most likely initial infection point seemed to be a targeted watering hole attack. That's where attackers compromise a legitimate website that they know their target audience, maybe employees of a specific company or industry, frequently visits. Then they use that compromised site to silently infect visitors with the initial malware dropper. After the initial machine was infected, propagating the malicious notepad.exe and its corresponding config.dat file via administrative network shares across the internal network would have been relatively straightforward for the attackers, assuming they gained sufficient privileges. But the crucial point here is this. The malicious file we investigated did not come from the official distribution sites for Notepad or Notepad++. It was acquired from somewhere else, likely the watering hole site. This just highlights the critical importance of only downloading software from trusted, verified sources, no matter how familiar or benign the application might seem. That download source is everything. And what's truly fascinating here, really digging into the weaponization of open source software like this, is its profound impact on detection. It's really challenging. Because of its uncanny resemblance to a legitimate Notepad++ file, the analyzed sample can be so easily mistaken as non-malicious, especially by employees, maybe with limited technical know-how. They see the icon, the interface, it feels right. Threat actors achieve this disguise precisely by Trojanizing open source software. Notepad++'s source code is publicly available on platforms like GitHub, so anyone, including malware authors, can download it, add their own malicious code like the part that loads config.dat, and then recompile it into a new executable that looks almost identical to the real thing. And because most of the binary code is legitimate Notepad++ code, and the malicious part primarily focuses on just loading and decrypting an external file, which, conveniently for the attacker, likes standard file headers, making it look like random data. Many traditional anti-malware solutions struggle immensely to detect it. This includes even some modern AML-based detection engines or security products that rely heavily on single-layer protections like static file scanning. The file looks almost entirely benign to many tools. It becomes a perfect stealth weapon.
That makes perfect sense, yeah. If you're just looking for known bad signatures or simple anomalies in the file structure, you'd completely miss it because it's, 99% legitimate code, just with that tiny yet absolutely critical malicious addition hidden inside. So it seems then that truly seeing those subtle hidden changes between versions or compared to a known good baseline is paramount. Trusting a file name or even a familiar interface just isn't enough anymore. You need that deeper behavioral and code analysis. Okay, the picture we're painting here is one of incredibly adaptable, professional, well-resourced adversaries. I mean, it's kind of daunting. So what does this all mean for us, the defenders? How do we even begin to fight back effectively against something so dynamic and pervasive as this whole malware as a service ecosystem?
Yeah, that raises the core question, doesn't it? Because the fight against MaaS is incredibly complex.
Yeah.
It really is. It's definitely not just about improving malware detection mechanisms, although that's important. That's only one piece of a much larger puzzle. We are dealing with a truly dynamic and, frankly, vibrant ecosystem that is constantly evolving its tactics, its tools, its organizational structures. It's not a single solution we're looking for.
Right. So it has to be more like a multi-pronged attack on their entire illicit business model, a coordinated effort across different sectors, not just tech.
Exactly. Dismantling the MaaS ecosystem effectively demands what we'd call a multidisciplinary approach. It absolutely has to be. This requires unprecedented cooperation among technological players, yes, but also regulatory bodies, legal enforcement agencies, and financial institutions. We need to devise countermeasures that address all of these domains, from better technical defenses and threat intelligence sharing to stronger international legal enforcement against these groups, to actively disrupting their financial flows, making it harder for them to profit. Furthermore, and this is absolutely crucial for every single one of us listening, MaaS cannot be effectively contained without solid cyber awareness and cyber hygiene programs for the whole society. This isn't just an IT department problem or an enterprise security issue anymore. It's genuinely a societal one that requires everyone, individuals, small businesses, large corporations, to be more informed and vigilant. Education, ultimately, is a critical defense layer here.
That's a huge point. It's not just about the advanced tech, it's about educated users and a collective societal effort. That makes sense. So, given the cunning ways these groups operate, especially with things like weaponizing open source software, what practical steps can developers and security teams take right now? What can they do today to bolster their defenses against these sophisticated threats?
Okay, good question. For developers, the core advice really boils down to vigilance and verification. Always double check that the repository or package you're pulling into your project actually contains what you expect it to contain. Don't just blindly trust a project name or a few stars on GitHub or a familiar-looking package name on NPM or PyPI. The best practice is to compare the desired repository or code, especially if it's been updated recently, to a previous, known, good version of that software or source code. Look for unexpected changes. This highlights the importance of rigorous version control, yes, but also actively validating the integrity of third-party code you're incorporating. Because, as we saw, even a single line of code, maybe looking like a harmless print statement if obfuscated cleverly, could be part of a malicious payload. Rigorous verification is essential.
Right, verify, verify, verify. Don't trust, verify. Makes sense for developers. And for the security teams on the front lines, the defenders inside organizations, what tools or strategies are proving most effective against these kinds of stealthy attacks that try so hard to hide in plain sight?
For security teams, one key technology area is differential analysis. This is becoming essential for understanding and defending against software supply chain threats specifically. Tools like Reversing Labs Spectre Assure, for example, are designed to surface malicious changes between package versions that might otherwise be completely hidden from view. They automate that comparison process we just talked about for developers. They can reveal those subtle insertions of malicious code, like the Banana Squad examples, that might escape casual visual detection or even traditional static scanning. It's about seeing those tiny, critical differences that an attacker deliberately tries to hide.
Okay, so it's about seeing the minute critical differences, the deltas, rather than relying solely on static signatures that can be easily bypassed by recompiling or slightly modifying code.
Precisely. Signatures are still useful, but not sufficient. Additionally, security teams must actively utilize specific indicators of compromise, IOCs. Things like known bad domains, URLs, IP addresses, file hashes, provided by threat intelligence feeds and research reports. Like the list of hashes and URLs we mentioned associated with the Banana Squad campaign or the malicious notepad.exe file. Integrating these specific IOCs into their detection systems, like SIEMs, EDRs, firewalls, can help identify specific known threats quickly. But beyond specific indicators, to really combat Trojanized open source software and other advanced stealthy threats effectively, solutions that grant comprehensive visibility across multiple security layers are crucial. Siloed views aren't enough anymore. This means leveraging technology like Extended Detection and Response, or XDR. XDR platforms collect and correlate data across endpoints, email gateways, cloud workloads, network traffic, identity systems, everything. This broader perspective and the ability to correlate seemingly unrelated events provide much richer context. It enables security teams to detect advanced and targeted threats much earlier in the attack chain, often by spotting faint signals across multiple systems, allowing for a more proactive and adaptive defense posture. #tag outro.
Wow, what a journey we've been on, seriously. From state-sponsored espionage pulling data out of air-gapped systems using like electromagnetic waves from RAM, to the highly organized, almost corporate structure of human-operated ransomware gangs destroying backups and hitting victims with double extortion. And the truly ingenious ways open source software is being weaponized by groups like Banana Squad, hiding code in plain sight. It's just crystal clear that cyber threats are more organized, more sophisticated, and more insidious than ever before. We've really seen how a single malicious file can perfectly mimic something familiar like Notepad, hiding its true intent, and how entire criminal organizations are structured like these complex businesses to achieve their illicit goals. It's a truly complex shadow economy out there.
And if we connect all this back to the bigger picture, it really raises an important, maybe slightly unsettling question for all of us, doesn't it? In a world where digital trust is constantly being challenged, eroded, and even actively weaponized against us, how do we collectively build systems and, maybe more importantly, foster a culture where every digital interaction is approached with a healthy level of skepticism, where we have a deeper understanding of the underlying risks, not just for big organizations, but for individuals too in our daily lives online? The very fabric of our digital society kind of depends on this continuous vigilance and informed caution, I think.
That is definitely food for thought. A healthy skepticism indeed. Well, we hope this deep dive has given you a powerful shortcut to being well informed about this absolutely critical topic, and maybe illuminated just how sophisticated and integrated this shadow economy of cyber threats has truly become. Thank you so much for joining us on this exploration today, and a huge thank you again to our sponsor, Stonefly. They are a leader in enterprise storage, backup, and disaster recovery, AI storage, and cloud solutions. Remember, if you're looking for secure, genuinely ransomware-proof storage, especially considering how attackers target backups, Stonefly sells air-gapped and immutable storage solutions. Reach out to them at sales@stonefly.com to schedule a demo and see how they can help protect your critical data. Until next time, stay curious and please stay secure.